My wife Beverly and I have been blessed by being able to worship with you several times in the last few years. And I appreciate so much the spirit of grace that is a part of this fellowship and this family. And I appreciate the fact that you have always welcomed us into your church family, and thank you for that. And I know your congregation is going through a time of transition right now. And transitions are always uncomfortable, aren't they? We really like things to stay the same. And yet the paradox is we also like things to get better. And we really can't have both those things at once, can we? And so it's uncomfortable for us from time to time. But the good news is God is with us. We are His people. And people who belong to God have always gone through seasons of transition, and God has always been with them. And think about the great stories in the Bible. Think about the people who are the descendants of Israel, who leave Egypt after 430 years of oppressive slavery. And even as they were leaving slavery, some of them were thinking, we're headed out into the wilderness. We had a steady 3 meals a day back in Egypt. This is a little scary. The message is, God is with us. Every journey, God's people journey with Him. And so I know in this time of transition, it's easy to be a little anxious, a little concerned. And so I was looking at this text the other day, and I thought maybe this text from Philippians chapter 4, and I want to encourage you to, if you have your Bible or your iPad or your phone, to open Philippians chapter 4 is where we're going to be. One of the hallmarks of the earliest believers was their incredible joy. And writers who were not Christians write about this joy that these Christians seem to know. Aristides wrote a letter to the Roman Emperor Hadrian once, and here's what he said. He said, "Every morning, all hours, on account of the goodness of God toward them, they render praise and laud Him over their food and their drink, and they give Him thanks. And if any righteous person of their number passes away from this world, they rejoice and give thanks to God." Amazing, isn't it? Transforming joy. I think that we live in a season where it's a little bit difficult for us to remember to be joyful. But this is what Paul says in Philippians 4. "Rejoice in the Lord always." I'll say it again, rejoice. There are there are numerous institutions that do studies and polls related to people's spiritual life and how they view life as a whole. Gallup, for instance, has done for 20 years polls. At the end of December, their poll said only 38% of Americans are satisfied with life. So many of us are dissatisfied, and yet we look around and we say, look how blessed we are. Beverly and I lived in El Paso for 36 years, and we can drive the interstate and look into a community where they don't have roads. They have dirt paths, and they live in shacks made with wooden pallets and cardboard. And this time of year, when it's cold, they burn tires to keep warm and to heat their little shack. And we, on the side of the river where we've lived, so frequently complain about what we don't have. It's so easy for us to become dissatisfied. So, the Apostle Paul says, I understand you're going through a tough time. I understand you're anxious. I understand that there are some things going on around you that have kind of robbed you of the joy that we need to know as the people of God. And so he says, I've got some things to say to you. And what I love about what Paul says about recovering joy is he doesn't say you need 3 more data points. He doesn't say you need to conjure up a particular feeling. He says what you need to do is do some things. And so he's going to give us some things to do. And I know that one of the most important things that any guest speaker at a church can do is be aware of the time. Right? There's an old story about a preacher who went to a congregation and he said, this morning we're going to talk about the prophets. And he began talking and he said, we'll talk about the minor prophets. And he talked on and on and on and on. And at the end of that, he says, now there are major prophets, and what part does Jeremiah have in all this? And one elderly gentleman stood up and said, Jeremiah can have my place, because I'm done. So, I'm going to try and be sensitive to that, okay? Now, I love the fact that in Paul's writing, so often, he's very theological, okay? He has some biblical truth he wants us to know. But almost always in Paul's letters, he comes to a place and he says, therefore. And he's going to tell us what we need to do. And Philippians chapter 4 begins with a therefore. And we get to Paul's bottom line. And the bottom line is, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say it, rejoice. And here's what he says first. Don't worry. Oh, that's a tough one. When we're worried, it's tough to hear somebody say, don't fret. Don't fret about the way things are in the world. Do not be anxious, some versions say. I don't want you to be worrying about stuff. And even more challenging, Paul doesn't say, don't worry about physical things, or don't worry about money, or don't worry about food. He says, worry about nothing. And that's a challenge, isn't it? In fact, my experience is when I've talked with people about this text, and I say to people, don't worry, some of us get more anxious because we had a list of things we're going to worry about today, right? We've got homework to be done, we've got projects at work, and we're behind, and the house needs some work, and groceries need to be bought, and maybe the car check engine light is on, and we're anxious, aren't we? But he's saying, don't be anxious. But here's the thing. Paul was in one of the most anxiety-producing environments you can have. He finds himself falsely accused. He finds himself in prison. He finds himself in a situation that is completely unfair. And in those days, jails, I have gone and visited people in jails, and they're bad places, but they're nothing like the kinds of places that were known in the first century. Nobody brought you food. Nobody brought you clothes. Nobody helped you stay in communication. So he's there, and he's there by himself, and he's in jail, and he writes in this letter, he said, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I may die here in prison, or I may get released. I don't know. Here's what I know. Whatever happens to me, it's not going to happen alone. God has never promised that we won't have trouble. He's just promised that we don't have to go through it alone. And see, I would be very different if I was God. I would say, I'm going to keep my people from going through tough times. I'm going to protect them. My people, my children, are going to be like the teacher's pet in the world. Everything's going to be cared for and protected. It's not what he says. He says, I'm with you, no matter what the trouble. There's some research that says 85% of our worries are things that never happen. So here's what Paul says. He says, do not be anxious about anything. So, this is a discipline. This is a skill we have to learn. And what Paul knows is, since most of what we worry about doesn't happen, We need to learn this skill. There's a tiny little book that I have that has been a favorite of mine for a long time. It's written by Peter Marshall, who was the chaplain of the United States Senate for a long time. And he has this great story. It's called The Problem of Falling Rocks. All right? And he says, I'm driving through the mountains, and I see this sign that says, beware of falling rocks. And I think about that. If I'm on a highway and a rock is in the process of falling, what can I do about that? If I decide I'm going to worry about it and be fretful about it, I could be looking up the mountain and drive off the side of the road. Or I could be watching for the falling rocks and run into one that's already on the road. So falling rocks, I can't really worry about that. And worry doesn't help me cope with any of that. It does keep me from sleeping well and eating well and thinking clearly and making good decisions. Worry does all that. And he quotes an elderly gentleman I love. He says, here's the way I approach life. When I work hard. When I set loose. And now that I know Jesus, every time I worry, I go to sleep. I love that. I love that. That's where Paul wants us to get to. So, that's the toughest one, all right? And that's like all the minor prophets put together, okay? We're going to move on. So the first one, he says, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. Don't worry. Secondly, he says, pray about everything. Everything. Does God care about the things we're anxious about? Yeah. Does a father care about the things his children are worried about? Does a mother care about a fretful child? So even Jesus, you remember in the Sermon on the Mount, said, don't worry about stuff. Worry will not grow more hair. And God knows the number, Jesus says. God knows the number of hairs on your head. And believe me, it changes daily. Right? He knows the number of hairs on your head. And he knows what you need before you ask. And so why does he want me to ask? Because he wants me to remember where all the good things come from. That's what I need. I need to constantly be reminded that every good thing comes from God. And so I pray. I pray about stuff. I pray about the things that make us anxious. None of us is president. None of us is king of the universe. None of us is in charge of the whole church. None of us can make people love God. None of us can make people turn the other cheek when violence comes. None of us can make someone else be patient. But God can. So he says, just don't worry about anything, but pray. And here's what I like about that. He's not saying you need more information. He's saying you need to do something. When worry creeps into your heart, do something. Talk to God about it. Worry's unproductive. Prayer can change things. I have a good friend, lives in Michigan. I used to work there some, and he let me use his boat to go fishing. And he used to make this analogy, and I really love it. He said prayer is like standing in a fishing boat, and you're tied up to the shore. And you need to get in closer, so you start pulling on the rope. And you have the illusion that you're moving the whole world toward you. But the truth is, you're moving toward the shore. And prayer changes things, but mostly my experience is prayer changes the one who prays. And so often the answer to my prayer is a better me, a newer me, a renewed me, a more trusting me. When I work, I work. But when I pray, God works. That's a whole different league, isn't it? So he says, okay, don't worry, pray about everything. Thirdly, be thankful for everything. Everything? You ever notice the greatest times of growth in life are surrounded by hurt and challenge? I hardly ever learn and grow when everything is going my way. It's just pretty easy for me to think, well, of course things are going my way. I'm such a good guy, right? I'm so smart. I've orchestrated all this. I made it all happen. But the greatest times of growth are when we're challenged the most. In just a few minutes, we are going to celebrate the greatest travesty of justice, the most humiliating, embarrassing event in all of human history. We're going to celebrate the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. Because God came into our world and we hated him, and we mistreated him, and we despised him, and we killed him. And as awful as that event is, you know what? We celebrate because his sacrifice covers my guilt. As awful as it is, it covers my guilt. And so we don't just participate in body and blood. We celebrate that Jesus gave his body so graciously. And you remember, many of you will remember Corrie ten Boom and her book, The Hiding Place. And she talks about the great lesson she learned when she learned to be thankful for fleas. She and her sister in this old barracks that was a prison camp, and it was awful, and it was cold, and it was dirty, and they were hungry. But one of the worst experiences was that the guards would come in and watch women as they showered, which was very rarely. But what they discovered was once the fleas moved into the barracks, the guards wouldn't come in anymore. And she said, me and my sister learned to be thankful for fleas. Isn't that an amazing story? And so Paul says, we have this view of what's going on in my life right now. It's like this little snapshot, but God sees the whole story. And we can be thankful for everything. So then he says, decide what you're going to think about. Think about noble and praiseworthy things. I hold the opinion that there's a great lie going on, that we can fill our minds with all kinds of ungodly things and every form of evil and still easily be kingdom of God people. But our minds are like these huge storage banks, and we become what we ingest. So we make choices about what we read and what we listen to and what we spend time with. And really, are we better off knowing all the latest Hollywood gossip? And does our faith increase when we hear about another politician who's abandoned principle? Are we blessed by people who traffic in the seamy side of life? I don't think so. I think the beginning of wisdom is Psalm chapter 1, verse 1. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit at the seat of mockers. Don't hang around with people who traffic in the worst parts of life. And so Paul says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about that. Decide what we're going to think about. Now again, remember what he's saying is, here's some things we can do to recover joy. And all the negative underbellies of all the worst things in life are not going to give us joy. And he has one more thing. And I have one more point, okay? And the point is, he says, do the right thing. Just do the right thing. And Paul knows we're all exposed to many good from many things. But what Paul says is most of us know the next right thing we need to do. It may not be the thing we want to do. Again, Peter Marshall prayed one time at the opening prayer of the United States Congress one year. He said, God, bless these men and women as they think about all the issues in life and they don't know what to do. But bless us more when we know exactly what we need to do and we don't want to do it. And I live there. Sometimes the things I need to do as a person who loves God and loves my family and loves his children and loves his country and loves his friends, I know what I need to do, but it's not what I want to do. So we struggle with that. So Paul says, okay, one more thing. When you recognize the good thing you need to do, do it. Do that next right thing. And you don't have to look 6 months or a year down the road and say, oh, I don't know what to do there. Just do the next right thing. The one that's sitting on our doorstep right now. Whatever you've heard or received or heard from me or seen, put it into practice. Practice it. And this is not all huge stuff, you know. We don't have to wait for greatness to descend on us to be able to do good things. And maybe it's that nudging from God about a phone call that needs to be made or a message that needs to be sent or a card that needs to be mailed or a lawn that needs to be mowed or whatever it is. Do the next right thing. And it'll bring joy. That's his point. It will bring joy. And his dream for these people is, as he says at the beginning, that they'll stand firm in the Lord. Joy is a crucial part of our relationship with God and our message to the world. Living like Jesus gives joy. It's not always easy. It's most often what we don't want to do. But there's a deep satisfaction. And here's the thing. This kind of joy, based in doing the right things, is not some Pollyanna view of the world. This is nuts and bolts where the rubber meets the road kind of discipleship. I love this quote, from one of my favorite authors, Lewis Smedes. You and I were created for joy, and if we miss it, we miss the reason for our existence. And if our joy is honest joy, it must somehow be congruous with human tragedy. And this is the test. This is the test of joy's integrity. Is it compatible with pain? Only the heart that hurts has a right to joy. Jesus experienced the cross, but went there joyfully. It's a challenge to us. But I have to tell you, I think believers at this place in our history, in our culture, we have an opportunity to be truly joyful people in a way that people who don't know God can never have. And I thank you for being so gracious and so patient and so listening. And I pray for joy for all of us. Thank you.